For my daughter's 8th birthday, my parents sent her a pink dress as a gift. She seemed happy at first but then froze. "What is this, Mommy?" I looked closer and my hands started shaking. I didn't cry, I did this. The next morning, my parents were calling nonstop. "My name is Elise Porter. I'm 34 years old. The day my old life ended and a new one began started with a crushed brown box on my porch. It was sitting there, lopsided and taped with abandon, looking like it had been through a fight. I almost smiled, thinking it was from Mark, my husband, probably another one of his spontaneous online purchases for our daughter Ruby. He loved surprising her. I nudged it with my foot, the cardboard giving way a little, then bent to pick it up. It was light, almost empty feeling. The return address, scrawled in my mother's familiar, looping handwriting, made my stomach clench just a little. A familiar, low-grade tightening I'd learned to live with. Inside my quiet house, I sliced through the tape with a kitchen knife. The scent of cheap perfume and something vaguely like my parents' house, a mix of potpourri and old paper, wafted out. Nestled in a bed of crackling pink tissue paper was a dress. It was a confection of soft, gauzy pink fabric with a frilly collar and a satin bow at the waist. It was painfully, achingly familiar. My breath caught in my throat. Stitched across the chest in tidy, elegant white cursive were 2 words that didn't belong here. 2 words that felt like a punch to the gut. Little Camille. Camille is my older sister, the golden child. The one who could light up a room and then burn it to the ground on her way out. The one who disappeared 6 years ago after wrecking all of our lives. My blood went cold. This wasn't just a dress. It was an echo, a ghost summoned from a memory 28 years old. A memory of a dress just like this one, a dress I was never allowed to wear. This package wasn't a gift for Ruby, my daughter, not really. It was a seance in a box, an attempt to resurrect a ghost. And the return address, my parents' house, confirmed who was holding it. They had sent a gift for my 8-year-old daughter embroidered with the wrong name, my sister's name. A name that was a wound. The flimsy pink fabric in my hands threw me back in time so fast I felt a wave of dizziness. I was 6 years old again, standing in the corner of our living room during my own birthday party. The air was thick with the smell of cake and my mom's hairspray. I remember the worn shag carpet under my thin party shoes, the way I kept smoothing down the front of my hand-me-down dress. All the adults were gathered around Camille. She was 8 and she was twirling her brand new pink dress, flaring out like a ballerina's tutu. It was a gift she'd received that day on my birthday, just for being there, just for being Camille. "Oh, look at her," my Aunt Patty, my mom's sister, had cooed. "She's a little princess." My own presents, when I finally got to open them, were stacked neatly to the side. They were practical things. A set of thick wool socks for the winter, a chapter book that was a little too advanced for me, a savings bond from my grandmother. Sensible gifts for the sensible daughter. Camille's dress wasn't a gift, it was a statement. It declared her the center of attention, the one worthy of beauty and admiration. My role, even at 6, was already cemented, to be the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who understood. Camille's role was to be the star. I stood there in my kitchen, the new dress draped over my arm, and I knew with a chilling certainty that this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip-up at the embroidery shop. It was a message, whether they consciously knew it or not. After all these years, they were still waiting for Camille to come back and step into the spotlight they'd kept warm for her. And in the meantime, they expected my daughter, my sweet, funny, wonderful Ruby, to be her understudy. They wanted her to wear the costume of the ghost they missed. My hands started to shake. I thought about the last 6 years, the endless cleanup after Hurricane Camille. I remembered the brand scam she'd pulled, the breathless phone calls about her new lifestyle empire that was going to make us all rich. All she needed was a little seed money. I gave her $19,500, nearly all of my savings, because I was the sensible one and I wanted to believe in her magic just once. Mom and Dad, of course, gave her even more, nearly $26,000 of their retirement fund. Then she vanished. The lifestyle empire was a mirage. All she left behind was a crater in our lives and for me, a pile of debt. She'd opened credit cards in my name, taken out loans I never knew existed. By the time I found out, the damage was $42,700. For 3 long years, I'd worked 2 jobs to fix it all. I sent my parents money every single month to keep them from losing their house, $1,200 for the mortgage, plus another $400 for groceries some months, and $550 for utilities whenever they called saying the lights were about to be shut off. I sacrificed evenings with Mark and weekends with Ruby. I told myself I was helping them recover, helping them get back on their feet. The dress, with its perfect white stitches spelling out my sister's name, told me the truth. I wasn't funding their recovery, I was just funding their fantasy. I carefully folded the pink dress, laid it back on the tissue paper, and closed the lid on the box. The fixing, I knew with a clarity that felt like a cold stone in my stomach, had to stop. I made the call that afternoon. I sat at my kitchen table, the offensive brown box sitting in front of me like a piece of evidence. My voice when I spoke was steady, too steady. It was the voice I used at work when I had to deliver bad news. "Mom, a dress arrived for Ruby." I didn't need to say anything else. I heard her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She knew exactly which dress I was talking about. Her tone when she replied was instantly defensive, a wall of forced cheerfulness going up. "Oh good, it got there. It's a beautiful dress, Elise. We saw it and just knew she had to have it. We wanted to get her something special for her birthday next month." "It has the wrong name on it," I said. The words were flat, stripped of any emotion. A heavy sigh crackled through the phone, a sound I'd known my entire life. It was the sound of my being difficult, the sound of my refusing to play along. "Oh, honestly, Elise, it was a mistake at the shop. You know how these things are. The girl behind the counter must have mixed up the orders. Just pick the stitches out if it bothers you that much. It's a simple fix." She wasn't sorry, she wasn't even embarrassed. She was annoyed. Annoyed that I had noticed, annoyed that I was making a thing of it. The casual suggestion to just pick the stitches out felt like its own special kind of cruelty, asking me to physically erase my sister's name from a gift meant for my child, as if it were a simple typo and not the symptom of a sickness that had plagued our family for decades. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt as solid as a locked door. "I'm sending it back." The line went silent for a beat. I could practically hear her recalibrating, shifting from annoyance to her more effective weapon, guilt. "Well, I don't understand why you have to be so dramatic about it," she finally said, her voice starting to wobble. "After everything we've been through, you're going to make a huge fuss over a little dress." Then I heard the click of the extension phone being picked up. My dad was joining the battle. "Elise, your mother is upset," he said, his voice a low rumble of disappointment. "It was a simple error. There's no need for all this." I took a slow breath, trying to keep my own voice from shaking. "It's not about the dress, you know it's not. It's about the name. Why would you put Camille's name on a dress for Ruby?" "Family forgives, Elise," Dad said, his tone turning hard and preachy. "Your sister made mistakes, yes. We all know that, but we don't just erase her from our lives. We don't pretend she never existed." They weren't hearing me, or they were choosing not to. They were reciting lines from a script they'd written years ago, a story where Camille was the tragic, misunderstood protagonist who just needed more love, more support, more forgiveness. And I was the unfeeling, rigid utility, the one who kept the lights on but didn't understand the complexities of the heart. In that moment, listening to their tag team defense, I realized they hadn't learned a single thing. Every dollar I had sent them, every extra shift I had worked, it wasn't for them to recover from the financial hole Camille had dug. It was for them to maintain the fantasy that she was still their perfect, precious daughter who just needed a little help. My money was the fuel for their delusion. "The dress is on its way back to you," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I stood up and carried the box to my front door as if the physical act of moving it would reinforce my decision. Before they could launch into another round of protests, I cut them off. "The monthly transfers are stopping." The sputtering on the other end of the line was immediate and chaotic. It was as if I'd just told them I was cutting off their oxygen supply. Disbelief warred with outrage. "What? You can't do that. We rely on you. The mortgage is due next week," my dad yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "You're being cruel, Elise," Mom sobbed, the tears sounding thick and genuine now. The threat to their comfort was real. "You're punishing us for a typo, a typo." I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I didn't list out my grievances or rehash the past 6 years of sacrifice. There was no point. Their reality was sealed tight against any facts that might contradict it. I just stated my decision as a fact of my own. While they were still talking, their voices overlapping in a frantic mess of accusations and pleas, I unlocked my phone and opened my banking app. My fingers were steady as I navigated to the recurring payments screen. I found the one labeled Mom and Dad Mortgage. Amount $1,200. I tapped Cancel. A confirmation box popped up. "Are you sure?" I pressed yes. Then I scrolled down and deleted them as payees for the utility bills I'd been covering. The phone in my other hand was a relentless barrage of their pain, their fear, their anger. I listened to it all, a strange calm settling over me. When they finally paused for breath, I said, "I have to go." "Goodbye." I hung up before they could say another word. My hands were shaking then, a fine tremor running up to my elbows. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, my head was completely, utterly clear. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning bright with autumn sun, they showed up unannounced. Mark had taken Ruby to her soccer game, so the house was quiet. I was in the kitchen, finally tackling a mountain of laundry when I heard a car pull into the driveway. A quick glance through the peephole confirmed my fears. It was their old, beige sedan. My stomach immediately clenched into a tight, familiar knot of dread. I took a deep breath before opening the door. They stood on my porch, a pair of grim-faced statues. My dad's jaw was set, his lips a thin, hard line. My mom's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, and she was clutching the returned box against her chest like a shield. "We need to talk about this," Dad said, his voice flat. He didn't wait for an invitation, just brushed past me into my entryway. They didn't look like concerned parents coming to mend a rift. They looked like debt collectors, angry and determined to get what they were owed. Mom followed him in and marched straight to my kitchen counter, placing the box down with a thud. It sat there between us, an accusation in cardboard. "This was a cruel, cruel thing to do, Elise," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. I felt the old reflex kick in, the lifelong habit of wanting to smooth things over, to manage their feelings, to take responsibility for their unhappiness. I fought it down, pressing my lips together to keep the apology from escaping. "The cruel thing," I said, my voice much steadier than I felt, "was sending it in the first place." They settled themselves at my kitchen table without being asked, a united front of parental disappointment. It was a scene I'd played out 100 times before. They started with the usual script, a well-rehearsed performance of their own hardship and sacrifice. Dad explained in a low, lecturing tone how my decision to cut them off financially was like kicking them when they're down. He talked about the rising cost of everything, their fixed income, the constant worry that kept them up at night. Mom started crying on cue, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue she pulled from her sleeve. She talked about the house, the possibility of losing it, the shame of having a for sale sign on the lawn of the home where they'd raised their children. They framed my years of financial support not as a rescue operation after a disaster of their own making, but as a daughter's basic, non-negotiable duty. It was something I owed them, and my refusal to continue was a betrayal of the highest order. Throughout their entire monologue, they never once mentioned Camille's name. It was a deliberate gaping hole in their story. The cause of all this pain and struggle was simply gone, erased. I listened without interrupting, letting their words hang in the air. When they finally wound down, the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. My quietness unnerved them. They were used to me arguing, defending myself, getting emotional, and then, eventually, caving. This silent observation was new territory. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice cool. My dad looked stunned, as if I'd slapped him. Is that all, Elise? We could be on the street. What is wrong with you? I ignored his outburst and asked a simple, direct question. It was a question that had been burning in my mind for 2 days. How much of the money I sent you went to Camille? They both froze. The look that passed between them was instantaneous and electric, a flicker of pure panic. The accusation was so direct, so far off their prepared script, that it left them no room to maneuver. That's a ridiculous thing to say, Mom snapped, recovering first. A hateful thing to say. We haven't heard a word from Camille in years, you know that. It was a lie, and the lie was so blatant, so poorly delivered, that it was almost laughable. She said it with the rehearsed desperation of someone who had practiced it in the mirror. It didn't ring true. You're lying, I said, my voice flat, holding her gaze. My dad, who was usually the better liar, faltered. His eyes darted away from mine, flicking toward my mom as if looking for a cue card. That glance was all the confirmation I needed. He cleared his throat, his bluster gone, replaced by a weary resignation. She needs us, Elise, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. She's been having a very hard time. The admission sucked all the air out of the room. It was one thing to suspect it, to know it in my gut. It was another thing entirely to hear it spoken aloud in my own kitchen. So you have been talking to her? I pressed, leaning forward slightly. All this time, Mom finally broke. The dam of her denial burst and a torrent of justifications came flooding out. Of course we have, she's our daughter, what were we supposed to do, just abandon her? She was struggling. We couldn't just let her starve. Her voice rose with every word, a crescendo of righteous indignation. They had been in regular contact with her since the first year she'd vanished. My sister wasn't lost, she was just remote. The rest of the conversation was a blur of their frantic, overlapping excuses. They painted a picture of Camille as a victim, adrift and alone, needing their help to get back on her feet. They'd been using the money I sent them to keep her afloat in some apartment in some city whose name I wasn't allowed to know. Every time I had sent extra money for their leaky roof or unexpected car repairs, it was a lie. It was for Camille's rent, for Camille's bills, for Camille's comfort. My sacrifice was nothing more than a pass-through account for their golden child. They had looked me in the eye week after week, month after month, and thanked me for saving them, all while they were actively enabling the very person who had set our family on fire. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just stared at them, at these two people who were my parents but felt like strangers. The spell of obligation that had bound me to them for 34 years was broken. I saw them clearly, perhaps for the first time. Get out of my house, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. They tried to argue, to backtrack, to soften the blow of what they'd just admitted. Now, Elise, don't be like that, my dad started, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it had changed the shape of the room. It had changed the shape of me. I walked to the front door and held it open. They finally seemed to understand that there was no more negotiation. They shuffled out, avoiding my eyes. I watched them get into their car and drive away, then I locked the door behind them, sliding the deadbolt home with a decisive click. I walked to my small home office, opened the supply closet, and pulled out a fresh, empty 3-ring binder. It was time to get organized. Mark and Ruby came home an hour later to find me sitting in the living room, staring at the wall. Ruby, my sweet daughter, ran to me, showing me a muddy streak on her soccer jersey as evidence of a game well played. Mark, my husband, took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. He sent Ruby to wash up and then sat beside me on the couch. They were here, I said. I told him everything. The unannounced visit, the performance of victimhood, the final, devastating admission. I told him about the years of lies, about my money being funneled directly to Camille. He didn't say, "I told you so," though he would have been well within his rights. He had questioned the endless flow of money to them for years, but he'd always respected my decision to help. Now he just listened, his expression growing harder with every word I spoke. When I was finished, the whole ugly story laid bare between us, he put his hand on my shoulder. His touch was firm, grounding. "Okay," he said quietly. "What do you need?" The question was so simple, so direct. He wasn't telling me what to do or how to feel, he was offering his strength. "I need proof," I said, the words coming out before I'd even fully formed the thought. "I need to see it all laid out. I need it to be real, not just something they can deny or twist." That night, after Ruby was asleep, her quiet breathing a peaceful rhythm in our home, I started. I went to the file cabinet where I keep our financial records and pulled out 3 years' worth of my own bank statements. I spread them across the dining room table, the black and white print stark under the overhead light. With a yellow highlighter, I went through them line by line, marking every single transfer to my parents. The recurring $1,200 for their mortgage, the frequent, smaller transfers. $400 here for groceries, $550 there for the electric bill. As the yellow lines multiplied, a sick feeling grew in my stomach. When I was done, I added it all up. The final number stared back at me from my calculator screen, $62,400. It wasn't just a number. It was the family vacation to the beach we'd never taken. It was the kitchen remodel I dreamed about. It was the chunk of our retirement savings that wasn't there. It was 3 years of constant, grinding stress, of picking up extra shifts at the clinic, of feeling like I was always running but never getting ahead. This was the first page I put in the binder, a simple, damning total sheet titled, "The Money I Sent." The next step felt harder, like a trespass. I needed to see where the money went after it landed in their account. I felt a pang of guilt, but then the image of the pink dress, of Camille's name stitched over a space that should have been Ruby's, flashed in my mind. The guilt vanished. I remembered that years ago I had helped my parents set up their online banking and bill pay. My login information, I realized with a jolt, might still grant me access. My heart pounded as I typed in their username and my old password. I held my breath, expecting to be locked out, but the page loaded. I was in. I expected them to have been clever, to have hidden the transfers to Camille through a series of complicated moves. They weren't. It was all right there in plain sight. My transfer would arrive on the 1st of the month, a deposit labeled from E. Porter, and within a day or two, another transfer, often for a similar or slightly smaller amount, would go out. The descriptions were vague: family support, living expenses, but they were all going to the same external account, one I didn't recognize. An account I knew with absolute certainty belonged to Camille. I took screenshots of everything. Page after page of their transactions, a clear and undeniable map of their deception. The lies weren't just spoken. They were documented in neat, digital rows. I spent the next hour printing, highlighting, and organizing. I created the first section of the binder, Funds Sent by Elise Porter. Behind that tab went my own bank statements, each transfer glowing with yellow highlighter. I made a summary sheet, a simple table with dates, amounts, and a running total that ended with the sickening final figure. The second section was titled, Funds Diverted to Camille Keene. Behind this tab, I placed the screenshots from my parents' account. This time, I used 2 highlighters. I marked my incoming transfers in yellow and their outgoing transfers to Camille's secret account in pink. The pattern was devastatingly clear. My money would arrive on the 1st, and a large chunk of it would leave by the 3rd. The binder wasn't for them. It wasn't to win an argument. It was for me. It was my anchor to reality, a bulwark against the lifetime of gaslighting that I knew was coming. It was cold, hard, and unemotional, a weapon made of numbers and dates. The stress of it all started leaking out at work. I was a mess, distracted and on edge during my shifts at the clinic. I'd misplace charts, forget to return a phone call. My mind was constantly churning, replaying conversations, adding up numbers. One afternoon, my coworker, Yvonne Clark, a no-nonsense woman with a kind heart, found me staring blankly at my computer screen during our lunch break. "You okay, Elise?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You look like you're a million miles away." I gave her the short, edited version. Family money problems. It wasn't a lie. I was trying to figure out how to pay off the last of the fraudulent debt Camille had left me with. I wanted it gone, a final severing of her impact on my life. I was scrolling through websites for high-interest personal loans, the kind that promised quick cash with devastating fine print. Yvonne glanced at my screen. She didn't lecture me, she just put a hand on my arm. "Don't do it," she said quietly. "I went down that road when my ex left me high and dry. It's a trap. You'll be paying for it for 10 years. She didn't offer a magic solution. She just shared a piece of her own hard-won wisdom. Her simple, honest advice cut through the fog of my panic. She helped me realize that I was still trying to find a quick fix, just like I'd always done for my parents. I didn't need another risky, desperate solution. I needed a steady, methodical plan, just like the binder, one step at a time, no more setting myself on fire to keep other people warm. A few days later, I was in the attic looking for Ruby's baby book. I was feeling sentimental, needing a reminder of the little family I had built, the one that was real and true. Pushed to the back of a storage bin, I found an old photo album I hadn't looked at in years. I sat down on the dusty floorboards and opened it. Inside, a picture fell into my lap. It was me on my 18th birthday, looking awkward and hopeful. Standing beside me was my grandmother, her arm around my shoulders, her smile warm and genuine. She was handing me a crisp white envelope. I remembered that day so clearly. Inside that envelope was a certificate for a college fund she had started for me when I was born. It was worth $14,500. A fortune to me then. I never used it for college. Mom and Dad had convinced me it was safer to keep it in their high-yield savings account, letting it earn better interest until I was ready to use it for something really important, like a down payment on a house. Years later, when Mark and I were buying our first home, I'd asked about the money. They told me a sad story about how the stock market had crashed in 2008 and the fund had lost most of its value. There was only a couple $1,000s left, they'd said, which they'd unfortunately had to use for some emergency roof repairs. I'd believed them without question. Why wouldn't I? Looking at the photograph of my grandmother's proud face, a cold dread washed over me. It was another story they'd told me, a neat, plausible story that explained away something that should have been mine. How much of it was true? My grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Carol, had been the executor of her will. Carol was meticulous, a retired accountant who kept records of everything. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. I tried to make my voice sound casual, telling her I was doing some long-term financial planning and needed the specific details about Grandma's gift for my records. She was delighted to hear from me and happy to help. "Oh, that was such a wonderful, stable investment your grandmother chose," she said, her voice chirpy. "One of those old reliable ones. It was barely touched by the market crash." My blood ran cold. While we were on the phone, she pulled up the file on her computer. I could hear her clicking away, humming softly. She confirmed the original amount, $14,500. Then she gave me the final, damning piece of information. She told me the exact date the fund was cashed out in full by my parents. The date was 6 years ago. The very same month Camille had called home, bubbling with her brilliant idea for a lifestyle brand that required seed money. It wasn't lost in a crash, it was spent on Camille. "Did that down payment work out well for you, dear?" Aunt Carol asked innocently. "I was always so pleased your grandmother could help you get your start." I couldn't form words. My throat felt thick with concrete. I managed to thank her and hung up the phone before I broke down completely. The money promised to me, a gift from my dead grandmother, a woman who had adored me, was the seed money for Camille's scam. This was a betrayal so profound it eclipsed everything else. This wasn't them mismanaging my monthly help. This was theft. They stole my inheritance, a piece of my past, to fund my sister's failed future. The most twisted part was that they had watched me. They had watched me work 2 jobs to pay off the debt Camille created. They had listened to me stress about my own student loans. They had seen Mark and me scrimp and save for years for our own down payment, all the while knowing they had taken my money and given it away. They had lied to my face, using a national financial disaster as a cover story for their blatant favoritism. The grief hit me first, sharp and sudden. Grief for my grandmother's loving intention and a strange, aching grief for the daughter my parents so clearly wished I was the one they were willing to steal from. But the anger that followed was clean and pure and hot. It burned away the last of my sadness. This was no longer just about cutting them off or protecting my own little family. This was about exposing the truth, all of it. I went back to the binder. I added a new tab and a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote in neat block letters, "Theft of inheritance." I wrote down the date, the amount, and a summary of my call with Aunt Carol. My goal had fundamentally changed. It wasn't just about self-preservation anymore. My new goal was to tear down the entire false narrative they had spent my lifetime constructing. A narrative where they were the loving, sacrificing parents, Camille was the brilliant but troubled star, and I was the dependable, joyless cog in the machine. I would not be silent. I would not be the bigger person. I was done taking the high road because the high road was getting me nowhere. I was going to hold up a mirror so bright and so clear that no one, not them, not my aunts, not my cousins, could ever look away from the truth again. That night, I sat with Mark and told him about the college fund. He listened without speaking, his jaw tightening as I laid out the story. When I was done, he just nodded slowly. "They made their choice a long time ago, Elise," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Now you get to make yours." He was right. The decision felt irreversible, a door slamming shut behind me. I was done being the family secret keeper. I was done being complicit in my own erasure. I was ready for the war. The phones started the week after I called Aunt Carol. It was as if a switch flipped and every relative who'd ever gotten away with a sideways look decided to call in. The first ring blinked across my kitchen counter while I was chopping onions, and the smell made my eyes sting. I wiped them, answered, and tried to sound normal. "Hi, Elise," Aunt Patty said, her voice bright as a postcard, like nothing heavy had been wrapped in the words. "Honey, Mom is just beside herself. She says you've cut them off completely." There was that tiny, practiced tremble at the edge of her tone that always begged for comfort without asking for facts. "I haven't cut them off," I said. "I canceled the recurring transfers and I'm sorting things out. We need to talk about money going to Camille." "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed. "You don't understand the pressure they're under. They're old. They need help." "You're being very selfish." She peppered the rest of the call with images: Mom sitting up all night, Dad walking the floors, losing the house, and each one was carefully selected to sting. That was how it began. Gentle, sorrowful calls designed to make me feel small. Then the tone shifted darker. Cousin David, who liked to post motivational gym selfies and share inspirational quotes, left a voicemail that was more accusation than question. "I can't believe you'd do this to them after everything," he said. His voice carried the old family disgust for ungrateful children. "They supported you. You're acting like the villain." I listened to a dozen versions of the same story. Each caller had rehearsed lines. They painted Mom and Dad as pathetic, fragile, and in need of saving. None of them asked about the money trail. None of them cared to hear how my transfers landed in a different account within days. They'd already decided. I felt the old pressure, the way family opinion could compress me like a fist. It was an old muscle memory. When everyone pointed, I used to point back, explain myself, retract. That tired, reflexive urge wanted to make me apologize and send the payments back through. I clenched my teeth and didn't. They were setting the stage, organizing the chorus lines. It was an ugly, coordinated effort to make me rescind before I'd even opened my mouth to explain. It was manipulative and efficient, and it stung in a place I'd always felt raw. The part of me that equated peace with self-erasure. The family group chat lit up like a holiday tree that night. I had muted it months ago because I didn't need the noise, but Mark nudged his phone toward me at dinner and the screen made a halo over our plates. Passive-aggressive memes rolled by, an image of a toddler with the caption, "When you refuse to help the people who taught you how to be needy," and another that said, "Honor your elders." The chat was suddenly full of sympathetic emoticons and long paragraphs about family bonds. What struck me was that the chorus was so tidy. My dad's phrasing about forgiveness, about loyalty, wasnessly repurposed into distant relatives' mouths, and Aunt Patty's sob stories were repeated like scripture. No one asked why a grandmother's gift would vanish. No one wondered why Camille's name was stitched on a dress meant for Ruby. They wanted a villain, and I had stepped into the role by refusing to be exploited any longer. A voicemail from my cousin's husband was worse. He called me a bully. He said I was tearing apart a family before the holidays. There was an edge to his voice that made my chest feel hollow. I deleted that message after listening to it twice, then shut my phone off and sat in the dark of our living room for a long time. The soft hum of the refrigerator sounded like a metronome. Mark found me there and sat down beside me. He didn't ask for details, he just put his hand over mine. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said simply. He tightened his grip. "They're circling, that's what families do when they need to protect something." "They're protecting Camille," I said. "They're protecting a lie." He rubbed his thumb in slow circles over my knuckles. "They're also pushing because they think shame will make it easier, but shame's a lousy currency." I told Mark about the calls, the chat, the memes. He listened with a patience I hadn't earned but deeply appreciated. When I finished, he looked at me with a tired, clear gaze. "You started this," he said, "not by emailing or accusing, just by saying no to the transfers. They're scared." He paused. "But they're treating you like you're doing something wrong for setting a boundary. That's what they've always done." "I know," I said. "I know exactly how they behave." He slid his hand under my chin and lifted my face so I had to look at him. "Don't let them get in your head, Lies," he said. He used my childhood nickname like a shield. "You're doing the right thing. You can show people facts. You don't owe them your peace so they can keep subsidizing someone else's mess." His words did something like flatten the panic in my chest into a workable form. Mark reminded me to breathe. He reminded me that I wasn't alone. But he also asked the question that cut closest to the bone, the question that had been whispering at the edges of every angry family message. "What happens when you stop paying?" he asked quietly. "Not what happens to them, but what happens to you, to Ruby, to us?" It was a question that hit me with the full force of my responsibility. For years, I defined myself by being the person who fixed things. That identity had protected me from the uncomfortable vulnerability of saying no. I realized how much of my life had been choreographed around absorbing other people's emergencies. Everything I'd done was to keep my family, my parents, stable on a foundation that wasn't mine to shore up. "If their house gets sold," I said slowly, "it'll feel like I caused it. People will say I pushed them into it. They already are. But if I keep paying, nothing changes. Camille stays in business as a permanent drain. Mom and Dad keep telling themselves they did the right thing, and my daughter watches it happen." Seeing Ruby's face in my mind, her small hands sewing a sunflower patch onto a thrifted denim jacket made something in me harden further. The cost of silence was no longer just about my comfort. It was about the lessons Ruby would learn. If I kept sweeping and forgiving, Ruby would think that caretaking at the cost of her own life was noble and expected. She would learn that her needs were negotiable and other people's demands were a priority. She would learn that her mother's identity was one of endless repair. The fear of being seen as cruel suddenly shrank compared to the prospect of teaching Ruby that people who exploit you should be tolerated. That realization made my anger clarifying rather than clouding. I pictured the binder sitting on my desk, the yellow highlighted transfers, the pink arrows leading to another account. I thought about Aunt Carol's voice confirming Grandma's money had been spent. I thought about Camille's dress and the way its white script threatened to ghost Ruby into someone else's story. When Ruby asked about Grandma and why she wouldn't be at her clarinet recital, I couldn't lie or dodge. Her little face that evening when she said, "Does Grandma like you, Mom?" that line stuck with me like a splinter. I felt the presence of family pressure in that room, an invisible hand tugging at my values. I knew then that silence was not strength. It was complicity. A few days later, I drove to the embroidery shop on my lunch break. I'd seen the logo on the packing slip, Donna's Designs, and something about a storefront, a name, felt like a thread I could pull. The shop sat on a side street, 2 blocks from the bakery where I used to buy cupcakes when Ruby had kindergarten parties. Donna's place had a faded green awning and a bell that jingled with the kind of cheer that wasn't forced. Inside, the air smelled like cotton and thread and a little floral detergent. Shelves of ribbons and catalog samples lined the walls. Donna Briggs was exactly what you'd hope a neighborhood seamstress would be. Small, stern, and with a generous laugh that felt like an envelope opening. Her hair was a soft gray, coiled like a nest at the nape of her neck, and she wore reading glasses that slid to the tip of her nose as she leaned forward to peer at my phone. "I have a strange question," I said, sliding a photo of the dress across the counter. The picture was grainy, but the white embroidery was unmistakable. Donna squinted, and then her face cleared like the sun breaking through clouds. "Oh, yes," she said, tapping the screen. "I remember that order. I did that one last week. Linda Keene brought in a photograph of an old dress and wanted it replicated exactly." My hands went cold. "Linda?" I asked. "Sure, sweetie." "Linda, she wanted it just like the original for sentimental reasons. Said it was for a little girl she loves." Donna didn't know me or my story. She was reading a screen for a living and offering me what the facts showed. She was particular about the stitching, made me do the name twice. Said it has to be Camille, Donna, don't you forget, little Camille. The way Donna said those words, the casual exactness, cut through whatever defenses my parents continued to spin. I felt a small, righteous heat build in my chest. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. "Do you have an order slip?" I asked, my voice too steady. She shuffled to a computer behind the counter and tapped at the keys with faded nails. "We keep copies for a year," she said. Here it is, Linda Keene, order number, paid in cash, right here." She printed the slip and placed it in my hand as if handing over a receipt for cake. The slip smelled faintly of toner and old paper. It had a date, an exact time, a note in Donna's cramped handwriting. "Replicate little Camille dress, include cursive name. Customer insisted." "Make it like the old one." It was small, a single sheet, but it felt like a verdict. I thanked Donna and left, clutching the paper like a talisman. On the drive back, the city looked sharper, each red light a punctuation in a sentence I was finally ready to finish. The phone rang that night while I was making dinner, an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen. I almost didn't answer, instinct tightening my chest the way it always did when their names appeared in my life. I told myself to breathe and hit accept. "Elise," the voice on the line was a study in softness, calm, practiced, the same tone that had once wrapped itself around promises and then evaporated. It was Camille. My stomach dropped in a way that made me want to sit down. She started like she was rehearsing. "Hi, I know this is sudden. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I've been working on myself. I've been getting help and I miss you." There it was, the old script. The apology that sounded like an opening move, not an ending. I could hear Mom's name faintly in the background, like a stage direction. Camille's breath hit the microphone in little, rehearsed puffs. "They can't help me as much right now," she said, quick and careful. "It's hard for them. I know, Elise, you've done so much, and I hate that I put everyone in this position, but I'm trying. I just need a little loan to get through the month. I'll pay you back, I promise. This time will be different." My first instinct was to answer. Hours of practice with other people's emergencies had me ready to step in, but the binder on the table caught my eye. The printed bank statements, the highlighted transfers, the seamstress slip with Mom's handwriting. Those pages made an argument that words couldn't. Camille's voice, soft as it was, sounded tinny and small next to the pile of facts. "I can't help you," I said, without the trembling I'd expected. It felt like the right, small truth. "I'm not sending anything." "You don't understand," she said, the practiced pity creeping in. "Mom and Dad are struggling." "I'm trying, really, just a little. It's not a lot." I didn't argue. I didn't offer a list of what she'd done, of debts and fake accounts and vanished promises. All of that was in the binder. "No," I said again. I can't. There was a beat of silence, then she switched tactics, the old charm slipping in like a coat. You were always the responsible one, she said, the compliment a weapon. I know you'll do the right thing. We're family. Those words landed like a spiteful echo. I pictured the pink dress and the cursive name and how deliberate every one of their choices had been. I hung up. My hand shook more than it had on the day I canceled the transfers, but my resolve was steady. Camille's call confirmed what I already suspected. They were trying to keep her afloat through me, and when that well ran dry, they reached back into their network to keep the story alive. She hadn't changed. The pattern was only more brazen. I sat back down at the kitchen table and added the seamstress's order slip to the binder. The page slid into a new tab labeled Intent. It was a small sheet of paper with Donna's handwriting and a note that Linda Keene had insisted the name be exactly Little Camille. I typed the date and time of Camille's call into a neat line on the next page. Call received October 15, 7:12 p.m. Caller, Camille Keene. Request, short-term loan. I wrote the details down without ornament like a nurse charting a symptom, apology, request, promise to repay. Everything clicked into a different shape. The dress wasn't sentimental, it was strategic. The money wasn't charity, it was supply. The college fund wasn't misfortune, it was theft. The binder was no longer just a record of what had passed through my accounts, it was a map of intent. The patterns were so consistent they almost felt cruel. I thought about Ruby as I wrote. I thought about the way she'd looked at Grandma's picture on our refrigerator and asked if Grandma liked me. I thought about how easily the family's expectations could reach across generations, folding another child into the role I'd worn like an old coat. Knowing they were actively trying to groom Ruby to be a replacement for Camille made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with money. It had to do with identity. It had to do with choosing who we were going to be as a family. Mark came into the kitchen then, coffee in hand, and read the seamstress slip over my shoulder. His face went hard and plain. He set his mug down like it was a small bomb. This is sick, he said, and he wasn't joking. The plan we had whispered about that night felt urgent and oddly simple. We were no longer defending. We were finished with that role. It was time to end the story they'd been telling about us. I would scan every document. My bank statements, the screenshots from Mom and Dad's account, Aunt Carol's confirmation about Grandma's money, the seamstress order slip, the notes from Camille's call. I'd put them into a single, impossible-to-ignore file. It's risky, Mark said, the word heavy. They'll blow it up, they'll call you cruel in every corner of the family, they'll tell everyone you made them homeless. I know, I said. I also knew that I could no longer let fear of their outrage be the thing that kept me from telling the truth. They already have, they've been telling that story for weeks. He made a face and then, as if shrugging on a coat, he moved to help. Then we get ahead of it, he said. We send the whole binder to everyone who has been calling, to the realtor, to anyone who's bought into the narrative. We don't argue emotion. We show receipts. We worked that night like two conspirators. I scanned pages while Mark organized the folders on his laptop. We debated the subject line of the email like it mattered. It did. We settled on something calm and factual, an explanation. We didn't want drama, we wanted clarity. We wanted the truth to be the first thing they saw. It felt like standing at the lip of a stage with the lights hot on your face. You could step back and let them keep performing, or you could walk out into the light and read the lines yourself. I padded the binder with copies so I'd have a set to mail to Mom and Dad, each one wrapped in plain pink tissue paper like the dress had come in. It was a tiny, neat bit of irony, pink tissue and paper receipts, but the symbolism pleased an ugly, private part of me. A week later, my mom called. Her voice was flat, thin, the way the sky looks when it's been scraped by rain. Your sister is here, she said, and I felt something in me drop like a stone. She's moving in with us, Mom added, as if that was the worst part and not the point. The words landed heavier than any accusation. I could picture her in our childhood bedroom, all of the old patterns picking up like dust in sunshine. My refusal to fund them had not made the problem disappear. It had made the problem concentrate in one place. She has nowhere else to go, Elise, Mom said, the pitch of her voice going small and sharp with blame. Because of you. There it was, the familiar twisting of cause and effect. I could hear the invisible machinery shift into place. My boundaries translated into cruelty. My refusal to be their cash machine was being sold as a sentence. I could imagine Dad, too, hovering in the background, his voice suppressed so Mom could carry the theatrics. I could see Camille slipping back into the role she'd always loved, the patient, fragile heroine who needed endless saving. I pictured Mom fussing over small things, Dad making cups of tea, the house rearranged to make room for a person whose needs outweighed everyone else's for as long as it suited them. They were trying to make me feel guilty, and for a moment that old reflex to fix things quivered in me. The idea of my parents on their knees, losing the house, seemed unbearable in a way I hadn't expected. But the binder sat on my desk like a quiet witness. The seamstress slip, the highlighted transfers, Aunt Carol's dates, those facts made it impossible to go back to what had been. Even if I wrote a check tomorrow, nothing would erase the theft of my grandmother's money or the months of enabling. If they're home, I said slowly, then it's their choice to have her. I'm not sending anything else. You don't understand how this looks, Mom said, a tiny edge of triumph under the sorrow. You cut them off and now look. What do you want from me? I asked, softer than I intended. For me to keep doing what I've been doing, to keep cleaning up after the chaos? There was a long, breathy silence on the line. Mom ended with a message that stung because it was so familiar and childish. I hope you're happy. Hanging up, I felt defeat like a cold wind. It wasn't because Camille had come home. It was because the consequence of saying no had concentrated the problem where I couldn't ignore it. They would not have to look for money anymore. They would shelter her, feed her, and in time they'd fold their criticism into stories that painted me as the villain. But the truth, the binder, the receipts, those were safe, tucked away in my office. The defense of our small household, of Ruby's elementary school concerts and Sunday pancakes, had to go on. I straightened the papers, smoothed the seamstress slip into its tab labeled intent, and thought about the email we hadn't yet sent. The wound felt raw, but my resolve had turned solid again. A week later, a cousin sent me a photo that felt like a punch. It was of our old house with a for sale sign staked into the front yard, the yellow leaves of the maple tree dusting the lawn like a slow, sad confetti. My throat closed. The house had been the container of our childhood, the lumps of carpet under the couch where we hid, Mom's chipped teacups on the shelf, the top bunk I'd chosen to avoid being in the same room as Camille. Seeing that sign felt like watching a memorial being put up while you still needed to say goodbye. The family group chat lit up like a small, angry fire. Someone posted the picture with a caption, "This is what happens when you're selfish." Others piled on with the usual things, ropes of sympathy for Mom and Dad, an emoji that was supposed to look sad but really just looked smug. "Elise needs to think about what she's doing," one message read. "After all they've done for her," wrote another, as if decades of obedience were a debt and not a pattern. Mark came over to my laptop and scrolled through the thread with a slow, quiet face. "They're trying to make the sign the story," he said. He wasn't angry at the sign, he was angry at the narrative the family was spinning. For them, a house on the market was a perfect picture of ruin, visual, shareable, undeniable. It made for a good story people could tell to justify their feelings. It turned accountability into a performance where I was the villain. I felt suddenly very small. I thought about the nights I'd slept on the idea that my money was keeping the roof over their heads. I'd spent so long imagining that if I stopped they'd topple like dominoes. The first reflex was the old reflex, open my wallet, smooth it over. The second reflex was new, to look at the evidence on my desk and let it do the telling for me. "You sure about this?" Mark asked, thumb running the rim of his coffee cup in a nervous circle. His voice had that soft question parents use when they want to make sure a teenager isn't about to do something irreversible. "I am," I said, and I was. It didn't make the aching inside any less. The sign on their lawn was a monument to every time I'd smoothed over anger and taken responsibility so they wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. It was emblematic and cruel. The family chat blew up with people calling me the reason they were selling, and some forwarded the listing to other relatives with a tone like a sermon. Even friends I hadn't spoken to in years messaged with thin, polite condolences. People I'd babysat for as a teen sent assurances that they'd pray for mom and dad. It was all the old machinery of sympathy and obligation grinding back to life without having to check facts. No one asked how the house had been kept up when they claimed to have run out of money. No one asked about the transfers that left my account and the rapid payments out that followed. People wanted the tidy story, generous parents, ungrateful daughter. I felt isolated in a way I hadn't felt since I was a child waiting for my turn to be seen. The narrative had already been seized and sold. The house looked like proof that I'd taken and they'd given. If I let that image stand without answer, it would become the whole truth to the people who mattered less than the ones who needed to know the facts. That evening, the call came. Dad sounded older on the line, like the gravel in his voice had been ground down by worry. He didn't yell, that would have been easier, he pleaded. Lies, he began, using the nickname he never used unless he wanted me to fold into my 6-year-old shape. It landed with the weight of every childhood compromise I'd ever made. We made mistakes, we know that. But don't let your anger do this to us. He told me about the meeting with the realtor, the offers that hadn't come in, about the way buyers looked at the wallpaper and at the worn hardwood and said things that meant old in polite language. He painted a picture of two people who were scared to death. He told me Camille was trying, she really was trying, and that she had been looking for a job, but it was hard. His voice sounded tired in a way that made the words ache. Help us just this once, he said. Help us keep the house, we'll pay you back, I swear. The way he said it hit the place in me that still sought approval like oxygen. For a beat I felt that ancient muscle relax. I imagined them losing the house, pictures getting boxed up, the things we had loved scattered and driven away on moving trucks. My chest tightened with the old fear, if I was hard, they would suffer, if I was soft, I would be swallowed. I could almost see Camille in my mind, slouched on the couch in our childhood living room while Mom fussed, Dad made tea, and everyone pretended this was how things should be. I could see Ruby asking me one day, years from now, why Grandma and Grandpa moved into apartments when they could have stayed in the house with the squeaky stairs. Was this what love meant, paying until you had nothing left? For a moment the old guilt rose like a tide. The choice looked monstrous. Return to being their safety net and keep their house, or hold to my boundary and let the house go. Those were the two figures in the ledger of my life that felt impossibly heavy. But the binder, the stacks of paper with highlighter scars, sat on my desk like a counterweight. Aunt Carol's call about Grandma's fund, Donna's order slip. The bank screenshots. The total, $62,400. The truth was not comfortable, but it was steady. It didn't plead, it didn't promise, it only showed. There's another way, I said, and I surprised myself by saying it out loud. I have copies of everything, Dad. I'm going to show people, not to hurt you, but to explain. People are already saying things that aren't true. I can't let that stand. He inhaled sharply, a tiny animal sound. You'll humiliate us, he said. You'll ruin us. I'm already ruined in their stories, I said. If I don't say anything, they'll keep saying it. If I do, at least it's the truth on record. I didn't tell him I planned to send the binder to the realtor and the family email list. I didn't tell him I'd mail copies to Mom and Dad wrapped in pink tissue. I kept the details close like a weapon in my pocket. There was a long silence that tasted like metal. Please, lies, he said finally, softer, like he was asking for something beyond money. Think about us. Think about what this will do. I thought about all the tiny betrayals stacked up into a pattern that had never changed. I thought about Ruby and the kind of example I wanted to set. I thought of my grandmother's folded smile in that old photo, the way she'd looked at me like I might be someone important. I had been holding her gift in my head like a promise. To give up now felt like losing myself again. "Dad," I said, my voice steady this time, "I'm not unsympathetic, I'm not cruel, but I can't be the bank for a fantasy. If you want to sell the house and make a new life, that's your choice. If you'll never account for what happened, then I can't make the choice for you." He tried one last time. "Help us just this once," he said, and I heard Mom shifting the story in the background, adding her own pressure. "We'll pay you back." We already tried that," I said. "You took Grandma's money, you took what was mine, you fed Camille, you thanked me for saving you while you were doing it. There are receipts, Dad." "I'm tired of being the only one carrying proof." He made a low sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a broken thing. He hung up. That night, I put Dad on speaker and set my hands on the binder. I opened the digital file on my computer and scrolled through it one slow, steady time. The document felt heavier than the paper. It had the exact same order, the summary page that showed the total, then a string of bank statements with my transfers highlighted in yellow and the outgoing transfers to a mysterious account highlighted in pink. There was Aunt Carol's email confirming Grandma's fund had been cashed out by Mom and Dad 6 years earlier. There was Donna's order slip in crisp black type, replicate little Camille dress, customer insisted on name. There were screenshots of texts, voicemail transcriptions, and a typed note summarizing Camille's call begging for a short-term loan. Page by page, the story read with a terrible clarity. Page 1 said plainly $62,400. Page 2 showed my monthly transfers. Pages 3 through 12 showed the pass-throughs. Page 13 had Aunt Carol's date. Page 14 had the seamstress slip. Page 15 had the brief note about Camille's phone call on the 15th of October at 7:12 p.m. Page 16 was a short paragraph I'd written. Intent: maintain Camille's lifestyle, groom new generation. It was blunt and I had written it coldly, the way you would mark a symptom on a chart. Mark read over my shoulder. "Facts don't leave you open to gossip," he said. "They make gossip look like what it is, gossip." I had rehearsed the moment in my head 100 times, and yet the finality of it made my palms sweat. I typed the recipients into the email field. Every family member who had called, every aunt and cousin who had forwarded messages, the family group address, the realtor's public email from the listing, and finally, Dad's and Mom's addresses. I kept the subject line simple. An explanation. The cursor blinked, the soft pulse a tiny metronome counting down to irrevocable action. I attached the file I'd labeled Keen Family Financials PDF. I didn't write a long preface, I typed one sentence. "Facts attached, read them before you reply." Then I hovered over the send button like someone about to lift the lid off a sealed box. Dad's voice came through the speaker again, maybe a second call, maybe the pull of a last hope. "Lies." "Elise, are you there?" he asked, voice small and impatient. "I'm here," I said. "What are you doing?" he demanded, sensing the change in my silence. "I'm ending this," I said. The words were quiet, but I felt them like an anchor dropping down. I hit send. For a moment nothing happened, then faintly at first I heard the ping on Dad's phone, then another ping. It was as if the room were a stage and the sound was the audience's gasp. On my screen, the little status bar changed from sending to sent. Mark exhaled in a long, loud way. I felt a tremor of adrenaline leave me. My phone did not ring, not then. The house felt unusually loud, the refrigerators hum like applause after a play. The family group chat, usually a roiling tide of commentary, was strangely quiet. No immediate flurry of outrage at the inbox as I'd feared. Just a slow, grave silence that felt like the pause between breaths when someone is about to speak a truth no one wants to hear. I sat there for a long time after I hit send, hands folded on my knees, listening for the inevitable. It came later in small, sharp ways: calls that went unanswered, texts that read like accusations, a cousin's short message. "How could you?" But for that first full hour, the quiet wrapped around me like a clean sheet. It was not victory, it was not relief. It was simply the end of waiting and the beginning of dealing with consequences. I turned back to the binder on my desk and ran my hand over the top page. The pink tissue I had set aside for the copies I planned to mail to Mom and Dad rustled softly when I moved it. The house felt steadier somehow, as if truth had been a beam finally set in place. Ruby's laughter drifted up from the next room where she was practicing scales on her clarinet, loud and cheerful and blissfully unconcerned with family sagas. Mark squeezed my shoulder and said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence after I hit send was heavy, final, and it carried with it a strange, new kind of possibility. The first morning after I hit send felt like a gift I hadn't earned. My phone stayed dark next to the bed, no angry alerts, no frantic voicemails. For the first time in years, I slept straight through the night, no waking at 3 with my mind racing, no imagining every worst-case scenario. I woke to the soft light of dawn and the distant sound of Ruby humming as she set up her cereal bowl. The house smelled like toast and coffee, ordinary and easy. I lay there a moment, listening to the small, steady sounds of my life and felt something loosen inside me. When I walked into the kitchen, Mark was at the table with his laptop closed and a mug that still had the faint ring of cold coffee. He looked up and smiled, that quiet, steady smile he has when things are raw but we're together. "Sleep good?" he asked, a small question that meant everything. I nodded. I told him about a brief, awkward text from Aunt Patty, an apology thin as tissue paper, and about the realtor marking the house sold. He listened without judgment, just the way he always does, and when I told him I felt guilty and relieved at the same time, he reached across the table and took my hand. News filtered in slowly over the next days. Mom and Dad had sold the house and moved into a small apartment. Camille had come with them. The details trickled through relatives and neighbors like rain. There was no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet consequences of a choice I'd refused to keep paying for. Someone sent a brief, apologetic message from Aunt Carol. It wasn't a repair, but it was something that acknowledged a crack. Mostly, the world settled back into a different normal, one that didn't ask me to erase myself to keep other people comfortable. On the first weekend that felt truly mine, Ruby and I started something small and stubborn. We made pancakes like we had on rainy mornings when she was little, a cast iron pan, a beat-up whisk, a big glass of orange juice. She measured the batter herself, proud of the way she could pour a perfect circle onto the hot surface. We ate at the small table by the window and talked about nothing serious. Which patch she wanted next for her jacket, what color is the best for letting sunlight through. After breakfast, we pulled out a thrifted denim jacket I'd found at the Saturday market. Ruby had already chosen a bright yellow sunflower patch and a tiny blue heart. She wanted to sew them on herself. I threaded the needle and showed her how to knot the thread, how to push the needle through fabric without pricking her finger. She concentrated like it was the most important thing on earth. When she pushed the final stitch through and tied it off, she held the jacket up like a trophy and grinned. "Right here, Mom," she said, pointing where the patch should sit. "It needs to be right here." Her certainty settled something in me. These were the rituals we were choosing, small, stubborn acts that belonged only to us. The jacket was ours, not a borrowed costume. The pancakes were ours, not a tradition handed down with expectations. Ruby stopped asking if Grandma was coming to her recitals. She stopped worrying about whether she was doing something wrong by being herself. She practiced her clarinet, and I practiced letting go of the burden I'd carried for so long. Some nights I still flip through the binder, the pages a hard, honest record of what happened. But most mornings I fold laundry with the radio on, watch Ruby wobble on her bike down the block, and make pancakes for no one's approval. Revenge, for me, wasn't loud. It was small and exact. I stopped rescuing them. I put facts where stories were being told, and then I built a quiet life with my family where their control had no purchase. Thank you for listening. If you've ever had to break a family cycle to find your own peace, share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. Please subscribe and keep watching for more stories like this one.